here tomorrow or day after. And so this is the broad outline of what I'm going to do. So I'll define a model of computation, what problem exactly we're looking at, then I'll state the main theorem and give an outline of the proof. So it's mainly a lower bound, and we also give an upper bound, simple observation, and then I'll give some conclusions. I'll also be using the board a lot, so please stop me if anything is unclear. I didn't mean the mark. So first let me define this model of unbounded error communication complexity. So unbounded error communication complexity was introduced by a paper by Paturi and Simon in '86. So it starts with two parties, Alice and Bob, who wish to compute a target function on the inputs x and y, which come from sets script x and script y respectively. So most of the time, script x and script y will be 0, 1 to the n, and they wish to compute a target function using a communication protocol pi. Okay, so I won't be too rigorous in what a protocol is, but so we have Alice here, Bob here, and what we're going to allow them, I should say, we're going to allow each of them access to unlimited private randomness. So privateness is crucial here. So in the original, so communication complexity was first introduced by Yao, I think in '79, and he didn't consider unbounded error. He considered, there was the bounded error definition, in which we require a protocol to correctly compute a function f with probability bounded away from half. So Alice has an, let me just quickly try to convey what the protocol is. Alice has an input x, Bob has an input y. Think of both of them be from 0, 1 to the n. And they wish to compute a function f. Think of it from 0, 1 to the n cross 0, 1 to the n to plus minus 1. So, and Alice has access to randomness, private randomness R1, unlimited randomness. Bob has access to unlimited private randomness R2. Okay, so it starts, the protocol basically dictates a sequence of messages, and the messages are only functions of the player who is sending the message and whatever they have so far. Basically, the first message is going to be only a function of x and R1 and f of 1. And then Bob replies, and then so on. And then finally, we require that the protocol outputs a value which we will call pi of x comma y. And let's also take R1 and R2 into account. So we require that overall the probability over R1 and R2 that pi agrees with f to be greater than half for all inputs x, y. So I hope so in the standard, in Yao's definition, we would require we would require this to be greater than half plus epsilon, and there we wouldn't make a big fuss of whether it was private or public randomness. But here it's an easy exercise to check. If you allow public randomness in this definition, then any function can be computed in a constant number of bits. So privateness is crucial. So now the cost of the protocol is defined to be the maximum number of bits transmitted over any inputs and any randomness. Okay, so there's no, so the only So is this definition alright? So very few lower bounds are known in unbounded error communication complexity as opposed to other models. And there are a lot of functions whose complexity drops as you look at various models. For example, equality, the equality function where Alice and Bob want to check whether their strings are equal or not. That requires omega n bits in the deterministic model. So note that when I say we require probability greater than half, you can think of it as you want a protocol that does better than random tossing, just barely better than a random choice of. So equality requires omega n bits, which is essentially Alice or Bob sends their whole input across to the other player. Then if you want probability bounded away from half plus epsilon, I mean greater than 3/4 say, and you allow only private randomness, then you can show that equality requires omega log n bits, theta log n, right? And in the unbounded error model, equality can be solved in just a constant.
Diameter is smaller, R1 and R2.
Yeah, so these are, R1 and R2. So let me define what XOR functions are. So this might be a mouthful here, so I'll just write down what an XOR function is. So basically, suppose you have two strings x1 to xn and y1 to yn. And you have a function f from 0, 1 to the n. So these are in 0, 1 to the n both. So we call f is equal to f of XOR. It basically what it does is you take a bitwise XOR of the bits. x1 XOR y1 gives you z1 say. xn XOR yn gives you zn. And you apply the function small f on this z string that you get. So that's what an XOR function is. So in general, people are interested in the complexity of composed functions in general. So XOR is a very basic inner function. We look at f of XOR. So a mod function is basically you look at the number of ones in the input. So it's a function from 0, 1 to the n to plus minus 1. Just look at the number of ones in the input, count them, and if they belong to some accepting set A, then output minus 1 and 1 otherwise. So for example, a mod 3, a mod 3 function with a singleton 0 accepting set basically outputs minus 1 if the Hamming weight of the input is 0 mod 3. That's the answer. So it denoted by mod and A. So I'm going to now quickly go through some basics of Fourier. I mean, it's okay if you are not familiar with it. So if you consider the vector space of functions from 0, 1 to the n to R and equip it with an inner product which is as follows, which is basically the expectation of the product of the functions. So this vector space of functions has various bases. So one basis you can think of is the monomial basis, which is the product of xi's. So this is not that basis, this is what we'll call the parity basis or the Fourier basis. One can check that this chi SS, so chi SS basically denotes the parity of x on the variables in S and the plus minus 1 value of that. So one can check that this forms an normal basis. And you can write any function, you can write its Fourier expansion. And then one has various nice properties about the Fourier expansion. If the function is plus minus 1 value, then you can show that summation f at square is equal to 1. Right. So let me now define what sign rank is, and then how it relates to unbounded error communication complexity. So the sign rank of a matrix, okay, I haven't written a. So M is a matrix, a real valued matrix with no zero entries. So the sign rank of M is basically I permit you to do any change. So it's a real valued matrix, not zero. I permit you to do any changes to the entries of M such that the sign of each entry is preserved. And the minimum rank you can obtain in that you doing these sign preserving changes is called the sign rank of the matrix. So I have used sign rank of f, a function f, to denote the sign rank of the communication matrix of f. So where the communication matrix of f is defined as follows. So if f is a function from x cross y to model f. So the communication matrix of f one can define as you index the rows by Alice's inputs, and you index the columns by Bob's input, and the x comma y entry is f of x comma y. So Paturi and Simon showed in 86 that the unbounded error complexity of f is essentially the sign rank of the communication matrix of f. Up to log of that plus or minus 1, so it's a time relation. So to prove lower bounds for the unbounded communication complexity of f, it suffices to show lower bounds on the sign rank of the corresponding communication matrix. So let's see some prior work on this area. So Forster in 2001 seminal paper. So this is essentially one of the only few techniques we know how to lower bound the unbounded error communication complexity of a plus minus 1 valued function. He said he gave a theorem that says it suffices to show an upper bound on the spectral norm of the communication matrix, which is the second largest eigenvalue of M transpose M. So it suffices to show an upper bound on the spectral norm of the communication matrix to give sign rank lower bound. So right now upper bound, and then he also showed that the upper bound, we get a nice upper bound for Hadamard matrices. So for example, the inner product function is a Hadamard matrix. So we get an omega n bound for the inner product function in the unbounded error. So as I mentioned, we are looking at composed functions. Now if the inner function just depends on 2 bits, so one which comes from Alice and one which comes from Bob, you can imagine that there are essentially just 2 functions. One is the AND and one is the XOR. So Shestov characterizes unbounded error communication complexity of f of AND in the case where f is symmetric. So when I mean f is symmetric, it basically means f of x is equal to f of y whenever the Hamming weight of x and y are the same. For example, the parity function is a symmetric constant, is a symmetric function. And the underlying predicate, so by predicate I mean the function on the Hamming weights. So Zhang and Shi also, so now one natural question to ask is, what if you have an XOR as the inner function? So Zhang and Shi conjectured in 2009 that Okay, they characterize the bounded error and quantum complexity of symmetric XOR functions, and they also conjectured that the unbounded error is essentially the number of times the underlying predicate changes its value at alternate points, I and I plus 2. So note that Shestov showed, as I mentioned, that the unbounded error of f of and is essentially characterized by the number of changes between I and I plus 1. So
So just to understand, df is just the spectrum of the symmetric.
the spectrum, yes. So clearly such a characterization wouldn't work for XOR functions because the parity predicate changes sign at every point. But parity of XOR is just again parity, and it's easy to see that parity requires just 1 or 2 bits to communicate. So our main theorem is we make partial progress towards this conjecture, and we analyze the case when f is symmetric and periodic as well. So maybe the corollary is more insightful. So I'll just leave this here for a while. So when I mean a non-trivial accepting set A, that means A does not represent the trivial accepting set, which is the all constant 0 or all constant 1 or the parity predicate. So because if mod M A corresponded to parity, again this would be easy. If mod M A corresponded to the constant, then again this would be easy. So we say that for every other case, for m smaller than square root n, sufficiently, then mod M A of XOR is hard. So if you plug in values of J and M here, basically this is what happens. So right now I'll give a proof outline. So first I'll tell you what the ingredients are that go into the proof, and then state a few theorems and lemmas, and I don't know, try to prove something.
So Nikhil, there's some intuition for why I versus I plus 2 in the conjunction. Is one direction easy? If there are few of these, is there a small protocol?
Right. So that we have an upper bound, which
Oh.
follows up from some earlier work as well, but not explicitly.
Okay, great.
So I'll come to that. So as I mentioned, Foster's theorem relates the unbounded error combination complexity to the spectral norm of the underlying communication matrix. Then an easy observation, I'll state this formally later. The spectral norm of an XOR function communication matrix is just the Fourier coefficients of the outer function f. This is just the outlines. Then we do Fourier analysis of these mod functions for particular odd values of m using exponential sums, which I won't be able to cover now.
So you mean the spectral norm is the largest Fourier coefficient? What do you mean the spectral norm are just the Fourier coefficient?
Sorry, the spectral values are the Fourier coefficients and not the spectral norm. And there's a multiplicative factor as well, 2 to the n. So we do Fourier analysis of mod functions for odd m, and to handle the even m case, we use an inductive argument using a shifting and XORing trick, which I'll come to later, to reduce the period of a even length period mod function to an odd length period, and then induct. And this 4 case is also analyzed separately. So So this follow-up work of Foster et al. So they relaxed the condition that the original matrix has to have plus minus 1 entries. So if your matrix has even, if you just say that you don't allow 0 entries, then there's just a scaling of the minimum value in the matrix. So SR, by SR I mean the signed rank, and as I had said, the signed rank and the unbounded, so signed rank and unbounded communication complexity are essentially the same, just a log factor. So in our case, M and capital N will both be 2 to the small n. So there is a small lemma. It's not too hard to prove. The spectral norm of the matrix of f of XOR is just the maximum Fourier coefficient times 2 to the n. So in case you want any proofs, you can contact me offline if I don't prove them now. Right? So combining this with this, we get the following. So we get that so let me denote sign rank of f of XOR letter equal to times So then we go on to analyze the Fourier coefficients of mod functions. So you don't need to look at all this jargon. Basically what we prove is that if you have M odd, then, so what does this theorem say? So this theorem says suppose your f was plus minus 1 value to start with, and you could show that the Fourier coefficients were all inverse exponential. That gives you an exponential lower bound on the sign rank, which gives you a linear lower bound on the unbounded exponent. So it suffices to show, I mean that all the Fourier coefficients are inverse exponential. So what we show here is that is almost the case for mod functions. All the non-empty Fourier coefficients are inverse exponential, but the empty one has some a large value. But note that large value is still bounded away from 1 sufficiently by 2 by n plus 1. So we have a modified theorem that says that even in such cases it suffices. It's still okay if some Fourier coefficients are sum up to something bounded away from 1 and the others are inverse exponential. So basically that's where that delta comes from. So basically if the L1 mass of a subset of Fourier coefficients is bounded away from 1 and the L infinity mass of the others is small, then we still get strong bonds. So this solves the case for odd M. And I have like 10. So let me just quickly give an overview of how we handle it for even M. So we want to use induction basically and then reduce it to an odd M case. Okay? So suppose you had so let's look at just one case now. M is equal to 2 times K, where K is odd. So let's look at the corresponding spectrum. So we're looking at mod M A. So this defines the spectrum, or what I'm calling the predicate on these are the values taken on these Hamming weights basically. So 0, 0, 1, 1. I don't know if it's visible. What I've written is 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. So there is a predicate of where n is equal to 4. That's, I don't want n is equal to 4, so I just let's look at a so basically this is mod 6 with the accepting set 1, 2, 4. So basically when the Hamming weight of the input is 0, it outputs 0. When the Hamming weight is 0 mod 6, it outputs 0. When Hamming weight is 1 to 4 mod 6, it outputs 1. So this is the corresponding spectrum. So let's first note an interesting fact. So the unbounded error complexity, let me call it UPP, of F XOR G is less than equal to UPP of F plus UPP of G. So this is not very hard to do. Basically, one can exhibit a protocol for F XOR G, which is basically Alice and Bob run the protocol for F, they run the protocol for G, XOR the outputs, and then output that as the answer of F XOR G. And you can check that this satisfies whatever definition I had said. I mean, with probability greater than half for all inputs and outputs. So, I mean, it agrees with the function. So, what we are going to do is we are going to take this mod. Let me just look at this mod 6 case. We are going to tweak it a bit such that we get a function whose complexity is similar to mod 6. Now I am going to ignore this of XOR. So yeah, I am just going to keep ignoring it. There's always an of XOR sitting there. So we are going to tweak mod 6 a bit to get another function. So let's call it mod. So F will be mod 6 with this A. G will be mod 6 with some A prime. So basically I'm going to shift the accepting set a bit. One can check that the communication complexity of this mod 6A and mod 6A prime are roughly the same, and then XOR them to get a mod, another mod with a smaller period. So that is the idea of, so F XOR G will just basically become mod 3 with some B. So this this part just becomes roughly, I am ignoring some factors, so additive factors. So 2 times UPP of mod 6A. There's an again of XOR of XOR. Right? Now what is this operation that I do to change the accepting set A to A prime? Basically, let's just shift this predicate by 6 by 2. So in general, m by 2 by length k, and then see what happens. So let me just shift this predicate by 3. So this 0 comes here. 1, 1, and so on. 0, 1, 0. Now one can check that whatever 3 values come here, the same values are going to come here, because these 3 values will just shift back here, right? So basically you see it's A XOR B and B XOR A happening here. So you get a period 3 predicate. But the problem is the predicate you end up with might be the constant predicate, and in which case you can't apply induction. So you can work a little harder, and a bit more of case analysis will say that you can reduce it, reduce the period, and then once we have this, just use induction. So another case is you might end up in a period 4 predicate, and then I haven't told you what we do there, but there's this theorem of Brugg. So Brugg introduced this complete quadratic function which satisfies the property that this maximum f at s is inverse exponential. Basically it's a bend or a semi-bend function. So yeah, that's one base case, this complete quadratic function, and the other base case is when m is odd. So an upper bound, as Srikanth was asking, why the conjecture, is there some intuition as to why they made the conjecture? So suppose you have this predicate D, so df, such that it doesn't have too many sign changes between I and I plus 2. Alright, so think of k as small. So the claim is that the unbounded error complexity of that is small, k log n by k. So if you think of k as logarithmic, then this is also log. So I am only giving a small 2-sentence idea here. So the proof idea is you construct a polynomial with small number of monomials which sign represents f of XOR. And how do you do that? Is you start with 2 different polynomials. One sign representing f of XOR when the Hamming weight is even, and one sign representing it when it is odd, and then you club them suitably by multiplying by parity or 1 minus parity and adding. And it's not hard to check that if you have a polynomial with small number of monomials which sign represents your original function, then that implies a efficient unbounded error protocol. So let me conclude. So recall that this was what the corollary to the main theorem said. So basically, if you have a mod function whose period is less than square root of n, then we've shown that mod m a of XOR is hard, the unbounded error. So by hard I mean polynomial. What if the period is more than root n? So our main theorem does handle some cases like that. If m doesn't have too large an odd factor or something, you can just go back and check it. So, but in general, we don't know what happens here. So, yeah, one thing which I didn't mention, but I hope was clear, that period being, if the period is m and f doesn't represent a constant or parity, then there has to be one I plus 2 sign change within each m period. And the another question is, what about general symmetric predicates? Zhang and Qi's conjecture, is it true or not? So I don't feel it is, but okay, thank you. No question.
So, what happens for random symmetric functions here?
So a random symmetric function would have a lot of I plus 2 sign changes.
Right. I mean, so you need a lower bound. You have a lower bound.
Oh, yeah. Actually, so I think, I mean, there's unrelated to this, but I think we can prove that for 1 minus little over 1 fraction of all random symmetric things, you require omega root n.
Okay. So that's a different proof technique.
I mean, it's close to this. Basically. I can tell you offline.
Okay.
Any more? Thanks.
So that was the last talk of the day. Let's thank all the speakers once again.